Hey, warmer from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family of Podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in segment number 2 by one of the gentlemen of the three-man weave, Ky McKeon. He does absolutely tremendous work over there. Now he does some work over at Action Network, was a part of the Almanac as well, and we're going to be chatting with him about how he handles these smaller slates, because we're going to have a small one on Thursday, we're going to have a small one on Friday, and how he utilizes that to handicap forward a little bit more to these Saturday games. We're going to get a little bit of a stock up, stock down report with him as well on some of the teams that he's feeling a little bit more bullish / bearish on from the start of the season. Take a little bit of a look at the Big Ten as well as two of the most prevalent teams that are going to be playing on Thursday, or actually from the great state of Wisconsin, with Wisconsin and Marquette. So get a little bit of a temperature check on those two teams. And then in the final segment, going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Thursday, as we hit some bank shots. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter / X timeline at @GNet_D1. Keep in mind letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Really did not get in any of those Twitter / X questions today, though I do know that we did see on Wednesday some pretty big breaking news that it seems as though all these guys that they were two-time transfers, they were being denied their waivers, they're going to be pushed through immediately, and that is something that you do want to be taking note of, like Andre Curbelo over at Southern Miss. I know that Joe Bejmili should now be good to go for VCU, guys like this, so do be mindful of that. And when we do encounter those sorts of players on the podcast, I certainly will be taking a look at them. I will be including them in the handicap, and I'll be making sure that these guys are actually going to be out there on the floor as well, because I'm sure that there might be one or two of those guys that might be dealing with like an academic issue, they might be dealing with an injury, things along those lines, but take a little bit of caution when evaluating these guys as well. They are going to be going up against a bunch of players that now have 8 to 10 games under their belt, while these guys have a big giant whopping 0 games under their belt, so that is always something to be mindful of, but that is certainly something that is going to be included in my handicapping moving forward. And something that I always do is take a look back at what we saw the previous day in college basketball and try to learn from it. So let's try to find some trends, try to get to know these teams a little bit better, and see what we all got on the college basketball front from Wednesday.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
Now, since the Greg Peterson experience on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network is from midnight to 3 Eastern. That'd be 9 to midnight Pacific time. I do have to record this a little bit in advance, so we don't quite yet know the final score of UNLV versus Creighton, though. Tell you right now, if Creighton covered this number, boy, oh boy, that would be wild, because Creighton down at the half, 36 to 28 against UNLV with this Creighton team. They're a very slow tempo team, so when they go cold, they really go cold. They went 8 of 29 in the first half against UNLV, and for UNLV, how about this young man, Dedrin Thomas? He puts in there 14 points in the first half. Absolutely tremendous showing from UNLV. So we shall see what we get there, and well, there might not be a lot of drama in the BYU Denver game, with BYU up 45 to 25 at the half. And certainly we're going to get to Chicago State in a second. How remarkable was that? But we did hit the DK Network write-up pick. At the time of the write-up, the total was between about 147 to 148. I know that this thing got steamed a high noon late night, but we got there on the opening / overnight total, 87 to 62, the final, as Auburn, they were able to win this game very convincingly. For UNC Asheville, by the way, if you did take the late total, man, they did not help you out at the free throw line. 9 of 18 at the charity stripe, as Drew Pember was the only guy that could put in points for UNC Asheville, which par for the course for this team, 23 points, goes 3 of 6 from three-point range. But for Auburn, offense very much on point, as for Auburn, it's not like they had a bunch of double-digit scores or anything like that. Trey Donaldson had 15, Chad Baker-Mazara had 11, everyone else had 9 points or fewer, just a whole lot of balance in this game. For Auburn, they go just 7 to 21 from three-point range, but only 7 turnovers in this game. So very spirited effort there. Southern Miss, they fall to McNeese by a count of 67 to 48, and you saw the team go without Andre Curbelo in this one. You got to wonder how things are going to look once he does come into the fold, because this was sloppy for Southern Miss. 19 of 68 from the floor, 7 of 25 from 3, while DJ Turn It Up Richards, how about 6 of 11 from 3-point range, and all of a sudden McNeese has become one of your most profitable teams in all of college basketball. Will Wade, he's had some issues off the court to say the least, but you know what, when it comes to everything between the lines on the court, I mean, he's been terrific. I believe that they are now 7-1 against the spread, so they continue to cash tickets. The team that's not cashing tickets right now, UW Milwaukee, they are still stuck on one win, I believe, as they lose to Longwood by a count of 80-67. They failed to cover the spread, so UW Milwaukee still stuck on 2 covers this far this year. I believe they might have been able to sneak in there for a 3rd cover depending upon closing numbers, but man, it has been a rough go of it for our good friends over at UW Milwaukee. As for Longwood, they were able to go 31 of 60 from the floor, and for UW Milwaukee, they're still dealing with BJ Freeman, their top scorer, being out of the fold. And by the way, for UNC Asheville, with their non-cover against Auburn, they're now 1-6-1 against the spread, as one of the lesser marks out there in college basketball this far this season. And we did see a lot of high totals go over. Marshall versus Toledo, that was a closing total about 163.5, goes over. Toledo, they're able to rally late. They get the outright win. They do not get the cover, but they do get the outright win by a count of 88-87. As for Marshall, they're actually down 10 points with 2 minutes remaining. It was looking like they weren't going to be able to cover this number. Marshall, nice bonsai charge with Obiana Onchele-Killian being able to contribute 25 points. For Marshall, they go 13 of 33 from 3, but for Toledo, they went 9 of 20 from distance, with Raheem Moss chipping in their 16 points and Tyler Cochran 33 points, 8 boards. So that was a pretty monstrous performance. UTSA versus Little Rock had an opening total of 165, closes 159.5. Money moved the wrong way, 93-84. Little Rock able to get the win, as this was a little bit of a foul fest. Little Rock goes 26 of 30 at the free throw line, and they shoot 9 of 18 from 3-point range. Little Rock expecting one of the Mitchell brothers from Arkansas from a season ago to be able to be eligible pretty soon for this team, as well as Jameer Chaplin was able to put in their 22 big points in the meantime, so they were able to get it done. Been a little bit of a rough year for Dartmouth, but they get a win and cover against Boston U, 63-56, and Boston U, this has been a team I'm just not very bullish on, to say the least. Lost a lot from a season ago. They are now, I believe, 3-7 against the spread, and for Dartmouth, you do want to be noting 2 of their better players, Dušan Niskovic along with Brandon Mitchell-Day, did not play in this game, second straight game in which both of those gentlemen missed, as they're currently dealing with injuries. And for Florida National, right now they're dealing with just stinking up the joint, as they got completely romped in this game by kind of 94-60 against Florida Atlantic. And if you had the under in this game, 91 points in the second half, was very much trending under. This closed anywhere between about 153.5 to 154.5. As for Florida National, they do go 11 of 31 from 3-point range, but for Florida Atlantic, 11 of 22 from distance, with John L. Davis being able to contribute 16 points. And then if you had the early day delight in Incarnate Word, they were not a delight for you, but Rice sure was. Go Owls, 80-57. Rice able to get it done. As for this Rice bunch, Travis Evie, who's been having a rough start to the season, 29 big points. He was able to bust out of his rut, so that was absolutely tremendous. And now we have to touch upon it. I'm doing this just as this game is going final. Chicago State, they become the second independent in, I believe now, the last 15 years to knock off a ranked opponent. Last time we saw it was when NJIT was able to go to Michigan, and they got that win about a decade ago. 75-71. Chicago State pulls it off outright as right around about 23.5 to 24-point underdogs. Wesley Cardit, 30 points. He did have 6 turnovers in this game, but for Northwestern, they lose this game, actually 75-73. Check that, going 8 of 17 from 3-point range. Boo Boo, he did his part with 23 points, but Northwestern, one of the best teams at taking care of the ball in all of college basketball, forced into 14 turnovers, so Chicago State played even up there. Chicago State was able to grab 2 more rebounds than Northwestern, and Northwestern 13 of 20 at the free throw line, 19 of 22 at the charity stripe for Chicago State, and a Chicago State team that was a skid mark on the underpants of college basketball just like 3 years ago. Jared Gillian, I mean, someone should give this man like a badge of honor for what he's done. Chicago State only about 5-7-1 against the spread this far this season, but man, I mean, talk about a turnaround from a team that was just oh so sorry a few years ago. Just a massive win for them, and looks like Liberty is going to be able to take care of business against Tennessee State, not knowing if this is going to be a cover or not, as we are currently doing this with about 5 minutes remaining in the game, and Liberty up by a kind of 65-47, and this was, by the way, very much a nip-and-tuck game early on in the second half, and Liberty has just went on a big giant run to put a lot of distance between they and Tennessee State. And if you're looking at the trends of college basketball right now, what has been a trend is, well, how about a whole bunch of overs, as we're seeing that in the NBA as well. For any of you any NBA bettors, my goodness, we have been seeing a lot of that. But as far as the season, the over sitting at about a 51.2% clip in college basketball with a few games pending from Wednesday, 803 overs to 764 unders, few pushes along the way. And overall the season, home underdogs now 181, 176 and 6 against the spread, so hitting about 50.7%, while favorites have a little bit of an edge, hitting at about 50.3% thus far this season. But if you look at the last 7 days in college basketball, we've been seeing a few more unders, 96 unders to 102 overs along the way. We've gotten, I believe, 4 pushes in there, and then home underdogs just 24 and 23 against the spread. It's been a relatively dry slate, while favorites, they've been having a tough time with it. Underdogs over the last 7 days, 104, 95 and 3 against the spread. So that's what we're seeing in college basketball right now, and that's what we all got on Wednesday. Now, let's talk with our good friend Ky McKeon about a few teams that he's stock up, stock down on. We're also going to be chatting with him about how he takes a look at these smaller slates of games like we're going to get for Thursday and Friday, and perhaps handicap forward to Saturday, and just some of the things that he looks for in his mid to late December handicapping. That's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, and now a part of the Beach Family Podcast.
Sports Betting Innovative Analytics has taken the guesswork and emotion out of sports betting to bring you an innovative and trustworthy resource to enhance your journey to becoming a winning player. With industry-leading money-back guarantee options backed by their sophisticated modeling, they want to introduce you to a system that's not widely seen or available to help you beat the bookmaker. Specializing in NBA, college basketball, and WNBA, your first week is always free. Get started at SBIA1.com today.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beast Family Podcast, and it is always great to be joined by this man, as Ky McKeon. He is 1/3 of the three-man weave. He does an absolutely excellent job taking a look at this great game of basketball that we all know and love. And he's based out there in the great state of Illinois doing some work over at the Field of 68 along with the three-man weave. I know that last year we saw the three-man weave do a ton with Action Network as well, and I believe that they're doing quite a bit this year as well. And you're able to follow Ky on Twitter /X, that is first name, the letters KNY, then an underscore, and then the number 3, then MW all together. And then for the three-man weave, that's at the number 3 MW underscore CB. And Ky, always great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Greg.
Thank you for joining me, Ky. And Ky, I'm sure that you've noticed as well as I have that we've got a relatively thin slate of games until Saturday. It's not going to be too rambunctious as we're doing this. We're getting set for a relatively small Wednesday slate. So my question to you is with regards to just things being all over the place in terms of the disbursement of games being quite uneven in college basketball, do you take days like Thursday and Friday where there's smaller cards and really allocate some of that time to preparing for what is going to be a pretty monstrous Saturday?
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to look ahead a little bit to Saturday. Yeah, because Thursday, 7 games, Friday, 8 or 9 games. Kind of sucks the way they do these schedulings, but obviously there's finals going on for a lot of these schools, so kind of makes sense. When there's small slates like this, I like to look ahead. Also, as I'm sure you probably noticed, the market tends to get hammered, we'll say, the night before when there's such small slates. It's kind of tough to pick and choose who you really want. Those games tend to get hit a little bit harder with higher focus.
Oh, they certainly can, and I do think that that's so well said as well, because there's such a focus on these games. If you catch a number that you like on the opener, you probably want to bet that right away, because it's not going to be flying under the radar as compared to, say, like a Radford versus insert your favorite school here game when there's like 90-plus games on the card. So I do think that that's very well said, and something that has been unique this college basketball season as well. And we've seen this with most teams. There have been a few exceptions, like Arizona, just every single game. They have been incredibly dominant, but I've just noticed this season that darn near every college basketball team has had some sort of an outlier through their first 7, 8, 9, or 10 games. And I do think that I've found myself doing this a little bit more this year, where you've got these outlier performances where a team gets super hot or where a team gets super cold, and I try to perhaps cut out the best result, cut out the worst result, and look at everything in between. Have you taken a little bit of approach to this in the past / this year? Because I find myself doing it a little bit more with the way that variance has been this season.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit higher this year, but yeah, in general, I think that's one of the most important things, at least in the past, in order to handicap games, was not overreacting to just one result, right? Try to kind of stay the course and get a bigger sample size, unless you are not too confident in your preseason opinion. If you're not sure on a team and you see a couple of good efforts, don't be afraid to raise them in your power ratings or vice versa. But yeah, there's definitely something to be said about not overreacting. This season does seem the highs are higher, the lows are lower for teams, so it's a little bit trickier. That probably has to do with, the lack of continuity across the board, for the most part, with the transfer portal and all of that. So it's tough, but as much as you can, just don't try to overreact.
Yeah, but I think that that's so well said, and it's something that I've found more of this year. I think I'm echoing a lot of your sentiments just because in the past you would always have outlier performances. It doesn't matter who the team is, what the year is, but it feels like they've just been popping up more and more. As Ky McKeon, he does absolutely tremendous work over at the three-man weave. He is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and there's some things that you do take a look at this time of year now that a lot of these teams have played, like I said, in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 games that you try to look for and you try to find perhaps some positivity / some negativity, because I do find myself this time of year looking a little bit more at these teams that have allowed, like, say, a sub 25% three-point shooting effort time and time again with their opponents, or if they're shooting like 40+% from three-point range, I look for them to come back down a little bit more. Do you dive into some of those things and look for positive / negative regression this time of year?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to look at for sure, shooting regression. Focusing on things that seem to be luck, so to speak, which basically is three-point shot making. There are certain teams, one in particular, Houston, that for whatever reason, year after year, they're just good at three-point percentage defense, and that's probably because Kelvin Sampson's an incredible coach, and they really harp on their defensive end. But most teams across the country, for a general standpoint, they should have around average in terms of three-point percentage allowed. So if you see a team getting scorched from deep, Eastern Kentucky, for instance, they're allowing 46% from three-point range, yet they are, I think, top 3 in the country in three-point attempt rate defense. That's a type of an example where I would expect shooting regression to happen, teams start to miss against them.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and it is something certainly to take a look at, and obviously taking a look at the competition as well, I think is so important as well, because I do think that with regards to a lot of these results, they're just not equal in general, and part of them do have to come back to a little bit of our priors coming into the season. I don't think that they should be completely abandoned, but it is that time of year where we are going to be finding some interesting teams that have lost 2 games, like a Marquette who's going to be in action on Thursday. I would still put them in higher regard than, say, an Ole Miss, who they enter into this week undefeated. We shall see if they're able to keep that going, and I do think that that's one of the hardest things to balance. I'm not sure how you take a look at just this time of year in general in terms of some of the things that are hardest for you, but for me, I do think that one of the most difficult things is taking a look at a team like Marquette with 2 losses versus your undefeated team has been playing a little bit of a cupcake schedule and trying to quantify, all right, what's real, what's fake?
Yeah, assessing strength of schedule is key. And luckily, looking at ATS records, we can kind of get a good gauge of that, cover margins, because theoretically, all else equal, the spread is sort of the great equalizer and helps us with strength of schedule. Your point about teams playing good recently and not wanting to abandon your priors is a big kind of balancing act, which is kind of tough sometimes to determine how much weight you give current form, aka the last couple games a team has played, versus the sample as a whole. I think this tends to flip-flop every year or so. I know 2 years ago, current form was king. Preseason ratings didn't really matter. If a team was hot, team was hot. Team was cold, and then it sort of flipped back. So it's hard. It's one of the hardest things to do in college basketball handicapping, I think. But, strength of schedule is a good way to look at it, and trying to really assess these results is another way.
There's no question about it. It's something that I struggle with. I know that there's just so many people out there that have a tough time with it. So anyone listening, if you're having a tough time with it, have no fear, because many of us do. As Ky McKeon, who does absolutely tremendous work over at the three-man weave, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Ky, we're through about 5.5 weeks in this college basketball season, and certainly there are teams that we got right, there are teams that we got wrong coming into the season, that there's a little bit of indifference. And in terms of teams that you have warmed up on, teams that have just impressed you in general, are there a few in general that come to mind as of right now in terms of teams that you've had to upgrade in terms of your power rankings from the beginning part of the season?
Yeah, well, BYU is probably the obvious one across the country. They got up to as high as 6th in KenPom, and their strength of schedule wasn't fantastic, but they just kept blowing teams out, and you have to give them credit for it. They've just been covering left and right. A team in a kind of a similar vein who was already pretty high up there to begin with is Arizona. They're kind of reminding me of UConn from last year, just a team that can do no wrong, that just blows everybody out, handles power competition with little sweat. That's certainly a team I've upgraded. There's several examples across the board. How about the A-10 as a whole? A lot better this season. It's sort of coming back up on the upswing after one of its worst seasons in history. Those are probably a few.
Yep, no question about it. BYU is a team that really does catch my eye, and we're going to be doing this podcast for Thursday, and certainly something that is going to be coming to the forefront is the teams from the great state of Wisconsin. Ironically enough, both the ranked teams that are going to be going down on Thursday are teams from Wisconsin in Marquette and Wisconsin. And if Wisconsin has a tough time against Jacksonville State, I think we're going to need to downgrade them a little bit. Vice versa for Marquette if they have a tough time against St. Thomas as well. But I think that these are two very interesting teams because we were talking about trying to gauge some of these teams that have taken a few early season losses. But where do you stand in terms of those two Wisconsin teams in the Badgers and Marquette? Because we saw them match up a few weeks ago, and I do think that these are going to be two teams to look out for moving forward, especially a Marquette bunch that I've actually upgraded them a little bit despite the two losses because I've liked what I've seen on the defensive side of things.
Yeah, I like both teams. Marquette is just fantastic. They have very little weakness. Top 10 on offense and defense per KenPom. And when you watch them, it's like, man, they pass the eye test with flying colors. They play so well as a team. They're so connected. They move the ball. Multiple guys can beat you. Just like last season. And Shaka Smart has done a great job building this program up to it. I don't mind they've lost 2 games. They lost at Wisconsin, who I think is very good as well. Super old team. And they lost on a neutral floor to Purdue when Purdue shot the absolute lights out. So I think Marquette is a title contender, Final Four contender. I think Wisconsin could get there for a Final Four contender. Don't see them as a title contender, but they can definitely make some big noise in the Big Ten. Probably my number 2 team behind Purdue there.
Yep, I think that it's very obvious that Purdue, even though they took that loss to Northwestern, they're clearly the creme de la creme out there in the Big Ten, and that is one of the most difficult conferences to be able to gauge as well, because once we do this podcast, Northwestern is going to move to 8-1 after their win over Chicago State, and I've had to upgrade them, and I feel like the Big Ten is right now one of the toughest conferences to be able to evaluate because you've got so many teams that have been a hodgepodge right now, Purdue being that top team, but right now Michigan State has the worst record in the Big Ten, which I don't think that they're going to be finishing last by any stretch of the imagination when it's all said and done within the conference, but I take a look at that number 2 spot between Wisconsin, Illinois. I'm starting to give a little bit of love to Northwestern, and I do think that it's going to be really interesting to see how these teams outside of Purdue perform moving forward.
Yeah, kind of a gross conference this year. Purdue's fantastic. I think Illinois, like you said, has looked great as well. I was super impressed with them in their last couple of games. The FAU game was probably their best effort ever. Wisconsin we talked about, but other than that, I'm not confident in any team. You mentioned Michigan State. I think they'll make the tournament. They'll be fine. But they have not looked good. They've kind of seemed like the exact same team we saw last year, which was a middling power conference team, a 7 through 10 seed sort of team in the NCAA tournament. Outside of that, I'm not sure there's a guarantee for any other team right now to make the tournament. I like Ohio State a lot. I think that's probably my next team there, but I don't trust Indiana. Maryland's looked poor. Northwestern, you're right, has looked pretty good, but they're still Northwestern. You go down the line, it's kind of like, man, you could go either way in terms of them making the dance.
Yeah, absolutely, and I do like what I'm seeing on Northwestern, but to your point as well, it is a bunch that we have seen them have their shortfalls after hot starts to the season as well. I go back a few seasons ago, I believe it was a 2020-2021 campaign where they got off to that amazing start, and then from there it just went all downhill. Penn State has a lot of question marks as well, and even a team like Michigan, they looked amazing in their first 4 or so games of the season, and they currently sit here at 5-5. So it has been topsy-turvy to say the least in the Big Ten, and it has been a conference that hasn't made a ton of sense, but what always makes sense is getting you on this show, Ky. You do absolutely incredible work over at the 3-Man Weave. You, along with Jim and Matt, are doing absolutely incredible work taking a look at this great game that we all know and love. So love to give you, people at home, know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can find 3Man Weave at 3MW_CBB. The YouTube channel, 3Man Weave. You see our weekly Best Bet show, our weekly podcast there as well. Trying to build that channel up.
Absolutely. Ky does an absolutely amazing job, and all three men over there at the 3Man Weave, they do such a good job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. It's always a pleasure to get any of those three gentlemen aboard. Today, it was a great Ky that joined me. So, big thanks to Ky McKeon for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the Visa Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Thursday as we get some big shots. And we're back to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Visa Family Podcast. It's always great to get Ky McKeon aboard. He does amazing work over at the 3Man Weave. Take a look at this game that we all know and love. I know that he's dialed up out there in the Midwest part of the country, doing an amazing job taking a look at all that we've gotten thus far this season, preparing for what is going to be a big Saturday as next few days. It's been a little bit grim with regards to finals, so we've had a little bit of a shorter card, but still, he's a man that does a great job of being able to find some value, does absolutely incredible work taking a look at this game, finding great angles, so he's always appreciated. Big thanks to Ky for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Thursday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that, as per usual, any changes are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at unit_81. Pretty much this is going to be going in time order. The game involving Grambling State versus Drake and Louisiana Monroe and Lamar. Those are the two games at the bottom, but pretty much as far as I take a look, it's pretty much in time order. So that actually keeps things very easy. So let's get things started with 871, 872 on the betting board. It is a Citadel hitting the road face-off against the College of Charleston. Charleston is a favorite of 14 to 14.5 points. Total on this game between 144 and 144.5. I did set my total out of 142.5. Looking at the under with Charleston, they started out the year very, very brutal from three-point range, and they're starting to pick it up. They're still outside the top 250 in terms of three-point shooting percentage, but you knew that they weren't going to be staying down forever. But this is also a Charleston team that over the last few years, they have been one of the better teams in all of college basketball. In terms of defense, currently, they're ranking 222nd in the country. In terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, I think that this is a direct result of playing a very difficult schedule. You play against Liberty, you play against Florida Atlantic, you play out there in South Carolina for that multi-team event, and that's going to cause those numbers to be going northward quite a bit. So I do think that we are going to be able to see some solid defense in this one, especially with the Citadel and the slowdown that they've had. You remember a few years ago, the Citadel was always that team that would play at a breakneck pace. They would run it and gun it under Doug Urbacum. Well, now Ed Conroy's in the fold, and now the Citadel, 346th out of 362 D1 teams in terms of total possessions per game. It is a Citadel bunch. I think it's going to be able to do an okay job down low. You bring in Quentin Melora Brown. He was over at Vanderbilt as a starter the last few seasons. He's been able to log about 9 rebounds per game, but I think that this is just too much versatility from Charleston. You had a little bit of a injury scare with Rain Smith a few games ago, but he returned in their last contest against Rhode Island, was able to hit a bunch of threes. He's shooting 40% from distance. Charleston last year was more around a 33% three-point shooting team. This year they're only shooting about 30%. I fully expect that to go northward, and it's a Charleston offense that just has been able to find itself recently. For Charleston, they've gotten to at least 74 points, and now each out of their last 5 games, they have given up 72 or fewer in 3 out of their last 5 as well. So it is a team that's coming around now. For the Citadel, they come in very impressive form, having given up 68 points or fewer in each of their last 5 games, but they played against a non-D1 team, NC Central, Campbell, Charleston Southern, and North Carolina A&T. Some of the biggest bumps in all of college basketball. We're just calling it what it is. Ante Brazovic, all the versatility that he gives Charleston, being able to log about 6 boards, 7.5 points per game. The fact that Charleston does such a good job taking care of the ball. They only turned it over about 11.5 times per game, despite the fact that they are a little bit more up-tempo. I think is going to take it out of a Citadel team that they are very top-heavy with their scoring in the backcourt, as you've had Elijah Morgan, coupled with A.J. Smith, be able to log in that neighborhood about 28 points per game. Both of these guys shooting north of 40% from three. You got one other guy on the roster averaging north of 1.7 points per game and shooting above 30% from three-point range. And I do think that even though the Citadel has been looking relatively impressive on defense recently, that it is a big component of just the competition that they're playing in general. And in the step-up game, I just don't think that the Citadel is going to be able to hold up. Did semi-total 142.5, so looking at the 144.5 under, and with Charleston, one lay up to 14 with them, made them a 14.5 point favorite. Now we have my DK Network right up pick, 873, 874 on the betting board. East Carolina and Florida do battle from RP Funding Center. That's out there in the state of Florida, but not in Gainesville, as Florida between a 15 to a 15.5 point favorite, and your totals between 153.5 and 154.5. Slim pickings on the board today, but I did make my write up East Carolina. I was willing to take 13 or more with them, and I tried to pick a game that I didn't think was going to move too much, that if we did see late night line movement, that I'd be off of this one. So this one was a little bit trickier to do because we only had 7 games, but that said, with East Carolina, they've really been able to come along with their defense. They have now given up 68 points or fewer in each of their last 3 games, as this team has been quite ghastly on defense as far this season. They're 241st in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but in this 3-game run, they're allowing 16.2 points fewer per 100 possessions than their first 7 games of the season, and they played against some halfway decent competition. They play against UNC Wilmington, they play against South Carolina. Now, the game against Maryland Eastern Shore, not necessarily so much of a step-up game, but all in all, I like what I'm seeing out of this East Carolina team. They should be able to do a solid job on the glass, and that is going to be key, because with Florida, the way that they've been able to generate their offense, they're currently right around about 46th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, is via second chances. This is a Florida unit that is number 5 in the country in terms of percentage of missed shots that get pulled in as an offensive rebound at 40.9%. Micah Hangalatin has been a big reason why, giving you about 6.5 points, 6.5 boards per contest. Was dealing with a little bit of an ailment, but returned in that game against Richmond, 10 rebounds in 19 minutes, so he's all good to go there. You've got a Florida team that is a relatively average 3-point shooting team, just below 33% from 3-point range, and they don't take care of the ball as East Carolina does. East Carolina has really gotten a shot in the arm from Bobby Pettiford coming in. He's had 9.8 points and 3.7 assists per game after beginning his career as a top 150 recruit over at Kansas. He's had more than 2 turnovers in just 1 of the team's 10 games this year. East Carolina, as a result, 65th in the country in terms of turnovers per possession. Meanwhile, Florida is clocking in 196th. They have been able to do a better job of taking care of the ball since Zion Pullen came into the fold. He missed the first few games of the season, and he's been rock solid. 13 points, 4.5 assists per contest, but it is a Florida defense that they've had their issues as well. You do take a look at this Florida defense, and they've given up at least 76 points in 3 out of their last 4 games, so I do have my concerns there. I do think that with East Carolina having Brandon Johnson back from illness with 8.5 rebounds per game, and you'll notice East Carolina doesn't have the world's greatest metrics because Johnson was dealing with a little bit of an illness during the middle part of the season to this point. I do think that that's big, and then you also have RJ Felton, who's been a very good Swiss Army knife guy, about 2 steals, 16 points per game, and as a matter of fact, each of your top 3 scorers for East Carolina, Felton, Johnson, and Ezra Azar, being able to all give you between 14.3 and 16.2 points per game. They all give you at least 5.8 rebounds per game. Combined between the 3 of them, 4.1 steals per game, and they all shoot at least 34.8% from 3. I think that firepower will allow East Carolina to hold in this game, despite the fact that you've got someone like Tyrese Samuel for Florida giving you 8.5 rebounds, and Walter Clayton being able to chip in there about 4 assists, 16 points per game. I do think that for East Carolina, a team that plays at a pretty slow tempo, that they're going to be able to hold in this game a little bit more as well. I did set my total at 152.5. East Carolina outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game, so looking at the under and my write-up, that is going to be taking the points with East Carolina. Set them as a 12.5 point underdog. 875, 876 on the betting board. Furman, it's a road face-off against Tulane, and Tulane is a 5.5 point favorite. Total is the highest I've seen all season long, 173 to 174, and I do think that a very high total is warranted. I set mine at a 171. I think we've gone just a possession or two too high. I am going to be taking a look at the under. Now, these two teams are playing very, very up-tempo. You've got a Tulane bunch that is in the top 10 in the country in terms of total possessions per game. You've got a Furman team that is playing more in the neighborhood about 35th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And, well, with this Furman defense, it has not been terrific to say say the least. 298th in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. This Tulane team, they're certainly leaving something to be desired at 187th, but I do read a little bit into the fact that for Tulane, they have been giving up in the neighborhood about 22.6 points fewer per 100 possessions at home rather than on the road. For Furman, it is a little bit of a new look team from a season ago. Last season, they had a bunch of upperclassmen that was able to lead them to the NCAA tournament. Now it's had to become the Marcus Foster show with about 20 points per contest, but for Marcus Foster, right now he's dealing with a little bit of an injury. He goes out early in that game against Princeton about 2 weeks ago, has not been seen ever since then, so that takes a little bit out of the scoring pop they should be getting for Furman, a Furman team that shoot right around about 32.5% from three-point range, and Foster was one of their top rebounders. He's one of just two guys on the roster that's been able to give you north of 4.8 rebounds per game. The other is Tyrese Huey, who's been able to do a solid job logging about 6 rebounds per game. He's also shooting 46% from three-point range. Now, I will say for Furman, in the 2 games that they have been playing without their star scorer in Foster, they have scored a combined 183 points, but one of those games was a game that involved like a bunch of technical fouls and a lot of insanity against Arkansas. And the other one was against non-D1 Bob Jones, and well, it was very bold of Bob to go up against an entire pack of Furman Paladins by himself, but not great competition. Meanwhile, you've got a Tulane team that I think that they're going to get it through their skulls that they can't give up north of 100 points to Mississippi State. Kevin Cross has been very versatile, 18 points, 7 boards, 4 assists. He's able to shoot 46% from 3, but I think a little bit of regression is coming here. He has shot below 30% from 3 in each out of his first 4 years on campus, so I think that there is going to be some coolage there, though I do think that Jalen Forbes picks it up. Last season, he averaged 18.5 points, 5 boards, 2 steals per game, and shot 39% from 3. He's now shooting 25% from the outside on about 11 points per game, so I do expect a little bit of a rise up there for a Tulane team that overall they're only shooting about 29.5% from three-point range. That is something I think is very noteworthy, but I think part of it with Tulane is that they play at one of the most up-tempo paces in all of college basketball, yet they've only got really 6.5 reliable scorers. When you play that up-tempo, I think that you need a little bit more depth. I'm a little bit surprised that they aren't going to guys like a Jordan Wood for a few more minutes. Colin Holloway has been able to do a nice job with 14 points per game, but do have a few question marks there. They've gotten a little bit more out of Trey Williams as well, who's been able to log in that neighborhood about 9 points per contest as well, but I do think that Furman is going to be able to hold in there. They're not going to be decimated on glass. You've got JP Peaks, who's got an assist-to-turnover ratio that's right around 3, and typically when you have clashing styles like this, typically you do find a little bit of the opposite. Now, for Furman, I don't think that this is going to be a team that's going to be looking to slow things down to like a Virginia-style crawl or anything like that, but I do think that this is going to be a game where you might be seeing one of these teams try a little bit of an opposite approach for even just a few minutes to be able to throw the other off guard. And when you have this high of a total, you really need to run good for the entirety of the game. And I just don't think we've got quite enough there. I set my total at 171, so I'm going to be diving in on the under. With Furman having the efficiency of Peaks, I do think that they hold in there as well. So set Tulane as a 3-point favorite, take the points for Furman, and diving in on the under. 877, 878 on the betting board. Jacksonville St gets ready to face off against Wisconsin, and the Badgers are badgering about being a 20-point favorite, and your total on this game, you're going to be finding it anywhere between 125.5 and 126.5, and for Jacksonville State, this offense has been quite grody. They are currently in the bottom 70 in terms of total possessions per game of Wisconsin. They, too, our team has been playing quite slowly as well, but I'm going to be willing to take a look at the over. I did set my total at a 129, as it's a Wisconsin unit that has actually been quite efficient in terms of their offense. Wisconsin has been able to get to at least 70 points in each of their last 4 games, and they've gotten to at least 69 points in 5 straight for this Wisconsin unit. They have been held below 69 points in just 2 games thus far this season, so they've actually been able to do a pretty rock-solid job in terms of their offense, this despite the fact that they shoot 33.5% from 3 now. Stephen Carl is shooting 72.5% from three-point range. Certainly, there's going to be a little bit of coolage there, but I do think that Wisconsin is going to be able to do a nice job with he and Tyler Wall being able to combine for about 22.5 points, 13 boards. You've got good passing ability out of both of these guys, so it's really been Chucky Hepburn who has done a nice job as a floor general. I think he's realized, he's not the feature scorer. That's AJ Storr, who's been able to give you 14 points per game, and after he shot 40% from 3 in St. John's, he's only shooting about 30% this year. I think that that'll be able to rise up. I do think that as well, John Blackwell is currently shooting north of 52% from 3 as a true freshman. You should be seeing that cool down just a little bit, but I know that there's talk that Connor Essegian should be seeing a few more minutes as well. He's been dealing with a little bit of a back issue after he shot 36% from three with darn near 12 points per contest a season ago. So I do think that Wisconsin has the firepower to be able to take it to a Jacksonville St team that is currently in the top 100 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but I do think that they're going to have a little bit of a tough time down low. Javon Purdue along with Marcelius Brigham Jr., these two guys have been able to log about 10.5 rebounds per game for this Jacksonville St team. The main form of their offense has been grabbing second chances. It's their top 50 team in the country in terms of percentage of missed shots that they do pull on as an offensive rebound, and I do think that the offense is going to be a little bit more efficient than they are in most games, and the biggest reason why is that for Jacksonville State, main bugaboo that you got is the fact that they do turn the ball over about 13.5 times per contest, and they are going up against a Wisconsin unit that, while they have given up 64 points or fewer in 4 of their last 5 games, I certainly think the 98 that they gave up to Arizona, quite a bit of an outlier, and just speaks how good Arizona is, but despite that, they're not a team that's really going to go out there and pickpocket too much, and that should allow Ky Tandy to be able to operate a little bit more freely. He comes in from Xavier. He's been tremendous with about 17.5 points per game. You've got a Jacksonville State team that as a whole shaky with their three-point shooting about 29.5% from the outside, but I do think that they hold in there against a Wisconsin team that, while they win the battle down low, I don't think that they dominate the battle down low, and like I said, with Essegian being a little bit suspect, you've got Max Gleesman, who's right now shooting about 33% from three-point range. I don't think that it's going to be a comfortable win in a game that I think it's going to be slower tempo, but I do think that there's going to be enough efficient offense to be able to push this total over. I did set my total at a 129, so you're at 126, 125.5 looking at the over. And with Wisconsin, set them as a 19-point favorite, so getting 20, going to be looking at those points with Jacksonville State to take a look at the over as well. And this is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before you hit our 2 extra games, 879, 880. Marquette plays host to St. Thomas. St. Thomas is an underdog of 24 points, and your total is 138.5 to 139.5. Did set my total at 138.5, so at the 139.5, I'm diving in on the under. St. Thomas, bottom 30 team in terms of total possessions per game, and Marquette has really slowed things down as well. They were playing quite up-tempo in the first few years under Shaka Smart. They're back below the top 160 in terms of total possessions per game, and for Marquette, this has been a much better defensive effort this year than we saw last year. Last year, they were a little bit of an all-or-nothing gamble for steal sort of team, and now they're doing a much better job in terms of their man-to-man defense. They're still doing a good job of being able to generate those turnovers, but Marquette now number 42 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, going up against the St. Thomas team that just because you're slow doesn't mean you're necessarily great on defense. That has been the case for them last few seasons, but they've really been better with their defense as well. They're up to about 107th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and actually allowing just about a tenth of a point fewer per 100 possessions when they are on the road rather than when they are at home. So this team has actually been able to do a really nice job when they have been on the road. So I give a lot of credit where credit is due. They're actually a top 75 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis on the road. And for St. Thomas, it's been really this team being a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. One, to be able to prevail, as you've got Parker Jorklin, who's been able to give you about 14 points, 5 boards per contest, and Raheem Anthony is the other guy on the roster that gives you north of 4 rebounds per game, 11 points, 5 rebounds per game. And for St. Thomas, them not being able to expose the main Achilles heel of Marquette in that they don't necessarily have a ton down low, I think it's going to be costly. With Oso Ogudero, give you 13 points, 6 boards. He's been absolutely tremendous on that front and is a willing passer for a big man. You got he, along with 3 others for Marquette that are all giving you at least 2.3 assists per game. Cam Jones has been your main scorer with 16 points, shooting 44% from 3, and Tyler Kolek. I just think that he's going to be able to cut through the St. Thomas defense with the way that he's able to impact the game in so many different facets. Only about 2.5 turnovers per game while logging 15.5 points, 5.5 boards, 5.5 assists, and he's done this while dealing with a little bit of injury, and it looks like he's getting stronger and stronger by the game. You've got a Marquette team that is willing to go right around about 8 or 9 deep, and for St. Thomas, I do question how they're going to be able to respond in a step-up game, because St. Thomas comes in winners of 4 out of their last 5, and they were all against Division I competition, but let's call it what it is. Teams like Western Michigan, Portland State, they just don't compare to what you're going to be going up against with this Marquette team that has been able to dominate lesser competition. We saw St. Thomas last season when they did have those step-up games against Creighton and company. They did have a little bit of a tough time with them, and they really have not been challenged this year since that game against California. So I do have my issues there against the Marquette team that has been much improved on defense, giving up 65 points or fewer in 3 out of their last 4 games, while the offense has continued to stay efficient. So this is a spot where at a 139.5. I'm going to be willing to take a look at the under, as St. Thomas, I believe, is much improved with their defense, but with the St. Thomas team, I just don't think that they're going to be able to generate a lot of offense against a Marquette defense that they themselves very much improved. So looking at the under, set Marquette as a 26.5 point favorite, so willing to lay the number, and now we get our 2 extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-601, 306-602, it is Grambling, and they hit the road. They're facing off against Drake. The Drake finds itself as a 22 to a 23 point favorite. Totals between 141.5 and 143. Boy, oh boy, what a difference a year makes for Grambling. Last year, this team was in the top 20 nationally in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They were dominant. And this year, they are 357th out of 362 Division I teams. Clearly, missing Ky Gordon and company has really affected the Grambling team, and as a result, I did set Drake as a 24-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number because not only is Grambling ghastly with regards to their defense, they're also shooting 26.9% from three-point range. Each out of your top 4 scorers are shooting 26% or worse from three-point range. Grambling still able to generate a few steals with 7.7 per contest, but they're turning the ball over 13.8 times per game. Now, this is not going to be some wild up-and-down game or anything like that, Drake. About 233rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. This is a Grambling bunch that they're pretty slow and controlled as well at 259th, and I think that's going to result in Grambling just not being able to find the bottom of the basket. You've got Jonathan Aku, who's the only guy on the roster that is registering north of 4.7 boards per contest, and he only gives you about 5 points per game as well. And this team only has 2 guys on the team giving you north of 3.6 rebounds per game, and only 3 guys that log north of 2.4 rebounds per game. That is a big issue when you go up against a Drake team that has Darnell Brody at 6'10", giving you about 7 boards per contest. Tucker DeVries, who at 6'7", is one of the most versatile players in the country. He does it all with 7 boards, 19.5 points, 3.5 assists, 1.8 steals on a mid-30s 3-point shooting clip, while Drake only turns the ball over 9.2 times per game as well. Now, I would like to see a little bit more facilitation behind him, but it does feel like we're getting a little bit more of that. Connor Enright, Kobe Garland have been able to combine for about 5 assists per game. Neither of these guys are prolific scorers, so Enright, with his just 6.6 points per game, is shooting 48% from 3-point range, and Aiton Wright has been Mr. Wright. Coming in from CSUN, he's been able to give the team right in the neighborhood about 14 points per contest, so highly impactful there. I do think that with Drake, even though they run a little bit of a thinner rotation, they are going to be able to take it to a Grambling team that, quite frankly, they just have not been able to get it right all season. They're getting gashed on defense. They are putting up no offense whatsoever for this Grambling team against Division I competition. They have yet to hold an opponent to fewer than 71 points, as they have given up 75 plus in all but one game against Division I competition. And for this Grambling team, they've got one cover thus far this season, as against D1 competition, they have broken the 67-point plateau once, with their high watermark being 68 points. I think that Drake is able to take it out on Grambling. Drake has given up now 65 points or fewer in 3 out of their last 4 games, so this is a spot where I'm willing to lay up to 23.5 with Drake, and did set my total at a 140 just because I don't think that Grambling does their part with this total. So looking at the under and looking to lay the number with Drake, and wrap things up with 306-603, 306-604. It is Lamar, and Lamar plays us to Louisiana Monroe. Monroe, a 2 to 2.5 point underdog, totals between 143.5 and 144. So Lamar is a 3.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to lay this small number with Lamar. I've been very impressed by the way that this team has just been a whole is greater than the sum of its parts approach. You've got so many different guys that do a nice job of being able to chip in rebounds for this team. Adam Hamilton, he has been your main guy down low with about 7.5 boards, 10.5 points per game. But how about what you're able to get out of Terry Anderson, 6'6" combo player, 12 points, 5.5 boards, shooting only about 29% or so from 3-point range, but you've got just a bedroth of scoring options when it comes to this Lamar bunch. Anderson is your top scorer at 11.8 points per game, but you've got 7 different guys between 8.4 and 11.8 points per game. So these guys all work in concert with one another. You're able to couple that with the fact that out of your top 7 scorers, 5 of them give you at least 2 assists per game. This is a very unselfish team. Now, it does lead to a little bit of volatility in terms of turnovers as well, because you don't have that one main trigger man. That does result in a few more turnovers, about 14 per contest, but they are dealing with a Louisiana Monroe team that they themselves had their issues with regards to the backcourt. You've had Tariq LaCour have to be a little bit of a do-it-all sort of player. He's been able to log for the team in the neighborhood about 10 points, shoots about 35.5% from 3 assists to about 1.6 turnovers per game. So he's been able to do a relatively relatively solid job for a Louisiana Monroe team that they're just not providing him with a whole heck of a lot of support. In terms of points scored on a per possession basis, 331st in the country. You don't have a ton down low with regards to Louisiana Monroe either, as you've right now got one guy who's been able to log for you north of 5 rebounds per game, and that'd be Jalen Bolden. He's at 6'4", able to give you about 9.5 points, 6 boards per contest. And for Monroe, they themselves turn the ball over 13.5 times per game, despite the fact that they play at a pretty slower pace than Lamar. Lamar is a team that they're not necessarily going to go at warp speed or anything like that, but they certainly are willing to push the tempo. They're 35th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Meanwhile, you've got a Monroe team that's 332nd in the country. So when both of these teams have a similar amount of turnovers, it speaks a lot more to the inefficiency of Louisiana Monroe than anything else. And for Louisiana Monroe, you're hoping for a little bit more moving forward out of the foreign gentleman in Ky McKeon. Hopefully I said that correctly. The 6'8" gentleman from Georgia named Nika, who's been able to give you about 10 points per contest. But after the first few years on campus, he was shooting about 35% from 3. That's down to about 22% from distance. And with Lamar just having so many switchable parts, with them having so many guys, they're able to bring up the ball. I do think that's going to take it out of a Louisiana Monroe team that they just don't have a lot of options in general in the backcourt. So I did set Lamar as a 3.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay this number, and did set my total at a 143.5, as I do think that things get bogged down a little bit more in terms of this tempo. I do think that Louisiana Monroe, because of, for one, their inefficiency, and two, just the way that they play in general, going to lead to a little bit of a lower scoring game. So take a look at the 144 under, and willing to lay it with Lamar, and that'll wrap things up for the Thursday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. A big thanks to Ky McKeon of the 30-Man Weave for joining me in the last segment. If you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @UNN_81. Keep in mind, letters EM. Me does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. By the way, that is fine an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And coming at you guys every single day throughout the college basketball season, which means I'm coming at you once again tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in.